This week on the show, we are delighted to be joined by a photo consultant coming all the way from Canada. Monashee, thank you for coming on the show. I understand that you are based in Canada, but you work across, well, internationally, basically, because these days there's no borders on where you can work as a photo consultant. But just for the listeners, to give us a little bit of an intro to your background, kind of how you got to where you got today in your position as a kind of consultant.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been in the industry. Thank you for having me, by the way.
You're welcome.
This is
You're
great,
welcome.
and it's wonderful meeting both of you.
Likewise.
I'm based in Canada, but I work with clients across the US and Canada, as well as internationally. And I've been in the industry for over 20 years. I started my first photo related job was at a stock photo agency. And then I went to art school in Chicago for a few years, did a lot of time in the darkroom. And then I pretty quickly after that entered the commercial photography space and have been, I worked with, photographers as far as doing production and marketing and the full gamut of everything that goes into studio management, all of those things. And then I started working one-on-one with photographers, primarily on their portfolios, websites, or print portfolios. Definitely image curation is where my passion lies and my strengths. But one thing that was happening is that a lot of the photographers that I was working with had, they were like, I love my portfolio, but I just have no idea what to do with it now. I don't know who to take it to. I don't know how to take it to them. I don't know how to price on things. And so pretty quickly, it became more of a holistic approach of helping photographers with everything that they needed to kind of be successful in the industry and navigate the industry. That's often very confusing for people especially when they're just kind of like getting started. But even for people who have been in the industry for a long time, it's still, having an outside person, an outside set of eyes is a helpful thing, for anybody. So that's essentially what I do now is, primarily the curation, still doing that, but I work, I have a group, I help people one-on-one with consulting on specific aspects of the industry or helping them on a particular job or pain point that they've got. So
I guess the interesting thing for that
is
is photographers are a funny bunch and an interesting, unique breed because they come from all walks of life, all backgrounds, covering all subjects. And yet, I guess, as much as there are many differences, there are probably many, many similarities that most of us as working photographers don't necessarily appreciate. And I'm sure you, as a consultant with that many years behind you, have seen the full gamut of photographers out there, but also realized what the common challenges are that photographers face. So I guess one thing I think our listeners would be really interested in hearing about is I guess to start with more of a general kind of look at the industry and advice that you might have to give photographers on, that you've garnered over the years. What would be, something that you would say when we talk about negotiating, for example? This is an area that me and Tom, when we speak to listeners on the show, it's a common area that people really find tricky. Photographers don't, and I think creatives in general, creative people who produce creative art don't like talking about money and don't like thinking about money or dealing with money. For whatever reason, it makes them feel icky. And I think a lot of the time that's probably coming down to, imposter syndrome and all of these other issues that kind of seep in and make people think, well, I don't know, I don't want to talk about it or think about it because it kind of makes me then think about deeper issues. So what what would be the key bits of advice over the years that you've seen photographers failing at, or things that you could suggest that people could try to help them in the world of negotiations?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things, but I
Oh.
think I think I think one of the big things is, a lot of photographers, first of all, I think, having somebody, pulling in
Mm,
somebody to support you, whether that's a person who, like, there's a lot of temp reps nowadays, there are a lot of reps in general, but people who can, producers, there are people that you can pull in to support. And especially
mm,
when you're out of your element, which I'm seeing a lot nowadays, there are a lot of photographers who are being put or asked to quote on jobs that are completely outside of
mhm,
their comfort zone. And so they're just winging it. And winging it isn't always, first of all, they're not necessarily going to know all of the things to be thinking about and considering. But even if you are experienced, it's still helpful to have somebody who's outside of yourself look at what you're doing, help you think about things that you might not be considering or thinking about, even if that's another photographer, because like you said, so much of it is imposter syndrome, or we look at ourselves and our own businesses through such a different lens than somebody who's
mm,
outside of that. So even if you have, I was talking to a photographer the other day about, if you can just, we were talking about list building, so it's a little bit off of, this, but it's the idea of, well, can you align with another photographer who they can help you build your list and you can help them build yours? Because it's really, like, it's so hard for photographers to do work on their own stuff, because they don't value themselves in the same way that they would put value on somebody else's business or somebody else's success. So having some outside perspective is really helpful when it comes to any part of the business, but quoting especially, because
mhm,
there are so many nuances. I think also, putting, like, actually, when you're building an estimate, a lot of photographers that I work with who are maybe not as familiar with commercial are, they kind of throw out all of their knowledge, when they're entering into a commercial job. So they might think, like, oh, I'm so excited, I'm getting to quote on this job and I really want to get it, and they want this and this, and so they kind of make up the price. And I hear that a lot. I hear people saying, like, oh, I just feel like I'm
mm,
making it up, like I'm making up the numbers. And it really shouldn't be that way. It should be based
mhm.
on real things, based on real numbers, that, like, you don't call your assistant or your stylist and say, like, can you just make up a quote for me? No,
Yeah.
they have a number, right? Like, there's a number
Mhm,
associated with what they do, just like there's a number associated with what you do as a photographer. So building the estimate is really a no-brainer in terms of, like, there are numbers that go with it. The usage is the part where people get thrown off and they get confused. But even with that, if you can go through it methodically and build it so that you're actually putting value on those, and then you can go through after you've assigned the value to it, and you're in the negotiation process, you can make
mm,
tweaks to it, but it's coming
mhm,
from a real place initially. And what that place is often, determined by the things you're going to think through. That could be what happens down the line. Where does the client go with this? What might happen to change the trajectory of this shoot? So you want to anticipate those things when you're building it out and considering, like, what am I putting in for usage? People will often go super low and then something changes and they're suddenly scrambling because they've bid on everything, and then they're stuck with this, in this low price. And it's really hard to unravel something once it's already
mm.
set
Yeah,
into
so
place.
I guess
So
there's an element of structuring your estimate in a way that it has space for contingency, space for changes, and I think a lot of the time people don't ask enough questions before they start putting the costing together.
yes.
I mean, personally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably quite helpful to have a list of questions that you almost have as a template, so that when you get a job come in, you can fire them back to the clients to help yourself build a picture of what the brief actually is, because not every client that's going to be approaching you actually knows or understands how to put a coherent brief together. And being able to get that
Yeah,
information out of them
definitely.
is the first stage, I guess, to being able to build an estimate.
Yeah, I actually have an estimate or a question worksheet that I'm happy to give you a
Oh
link
yeah,
to if
that'd
you
be
want,
amazing.
for that helps people kind of think about some of the questions they could ask. Now, I obviously always tell people, like, take it with a grain of salt, because you don't always need to ask all of the questions. You want to pick and choose and ask what's
Of course,
appropriate
yeah.
for the particular job.
We've had a lot recently, or I have had a lot this year of, hey Tom, are you available? What's your day rate? And you go, no, there's so many other factors, and they're like, yeah, but just for the minute, what's your rate?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, it's not. It's not how it works. What would you say if someone comes to you with that? Because normally what I do is I go back and say, my day rate is typically this. But as you know, there are so many factors that affect photo shoots. You know, can we jump on a call? I'd love to find out a bit more about what it is you're after. I'm only giving you this as an incredibly rough indication of it. This is not the final quote. There are so many other factors. Is that how you'd kind of go back to that sort of thing? I don't know if that happens in your market much.
It does. It happens a lot. And there's also a lot of people asking for rate cards nowadays, and, things. I'd say especially with the kind of mid to low or mid to small client base, asking for rate cards or asking for what your rate is. I find that it's sometimes actually helpful to give them a little bit, because then at least if they're in the ballpark and you're not spinning your wheels trying to create an estimate for somebody who's not really
100%.
even a realistic client. So I do like what you said as well. My creative fee or my photographer fee is such and such per day. But then on top of that, there's all of the production that needs to be factored in, and any usage. And in order to come up with those numbers, we need to have more of a conversation, and I need to ask you some questions. So that's a starting point. But there are, and then that at least scares away the people that the day rate is even too much. But at least set some kind of expectation for them.
Because I think a lot of this is just going to be about open communication, isn't it? Where, obviously not giving too much away when you're obviously having the chats. Because I've had chats in the past where I go, yeah, I'd shoot the job with this, and this, and this, and they go, cool, thanks for that info. You didn't get the job, this person did, and we're going to take all that info from the call. But for me, I think just. It's not hand holding, but it is just laying everything out and just being look, this is how much it will cost for me to do this job. Yes, obviously, I'm very happy to have the call because I need more details. But just so you like you say, scare them off if they're going to be, because if they're balking at the or balking at the day rate, they are not going to be easy to work with.
So
No,
I guess what would you say then? That's a common mistake then, would be that people don't ask enough questions. Are there any other common mistakes that you see photographers making when it comes to negotiation?
I think not. Definitely not asking enough questions. Assuming that the client is the lead, when really in reality, when you're being asked as the photographer to provide solutions for a particular job, they're looking to you to provide those solutions. So the estimate is the solution, and it's not the client's job to say, oh, we need this to happen in a half day, and we need this to happen with this kind of lighting, and we need this to happen. No, you are the only one as the photographer who can define what tools you need, how much time you need to take, to make their creative vision happen. I also find that a lot of times people are lowballing, putting in a low amount and then having to backpedal afterwards. Or what else is happening a lot? I think support. Not asking for support when they need to.
I think that's quite a common thing where you kind of, I've seen it where people, they have concerns, but they don't raise them early on. And as you said, you need to realize that if they're coming to you and you've got X amount of experience in the industry, X amount of experience of years in the industry, if you have a kind of little, blip that goes off in your head, kind of a little warning light that says, hang on, my gut instinct here is saying maybe they haven't considered this aspect, it's probably worth mentioning at the very early stage, because the last thing you want to do is kind of get onto the shoot and go, I knew this was going to happen. I could tell that this was going to happen, and I didn't raise it early enough.
That's the worst feeling.
Yeah. Having the confidence to kind of raise those concerns early on in writing, to be like, listen, we could do it this way because of budgets or whatever, but these are my concerns if we do it this way, just to kind of cover yourself a little bit.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, sorry. That's the thing is covering yourself. You need to be anticipating all of the things that, first of all, what are they asking, but what are they not asking? A lot of the smaller to mid-sized clients don't even know what they need. A lot of them are looking to the photographer to fill in the creative brief, the shot list, all of that. And and a lot of photographers, so this is another thing that is very common, is people taking on things, photographers taking on other roles without charging for it. Putting, saying, and I hear this a lot where people will say, oh, I talked to such and such a photographer and their rate was $2,500 a day. And so I'm charging $2,500. And with that, it's I'm shooting, I'm doing a scout, I'm doing a casting, I'm helping them find a location. And so really, those are all different roles. Somebody, and I usually tell photographers, if somebody else can fulfill this role, and it is, it's something that is usually a paid job, then it should be a line item on your estimate that you are charging for. And it doesn't need to be what the stylist would charge if you're doing the styling in-house, but because they're a professional, they've been doing that in the industry for a really long time. But it is also your job to explain to the client that it's actually saving them money to have somebody who is a professional stylist or a hair and makeup artist or something on set, because it will make the whole process so much more seamless. But if they are doing it in-house, then there should be a charge for that. And otherwise they're making nothing. When it all comes out in the wash, they're not making anything off of shoots because they've just charged them what somebody has described as their day rate. No usage, no nothing.
I often find that with pre and post-production in the UK, you get a lot of photographers that kind of see it as like, okay, it was a day shoot. And you're like, well, actually, they called you in for 3 or 4 meetings, and there might have been Zoom meetings, but that was an hour, 2 hours of your morning, and you couldn't get anything else done. And then afterwards there was like post-production, and then like, we've just found this other shot that we wanted. And sometimes it's hard to cost for that up front, because especially with the post-production, you can agree to do a certain thing, but then clients can change and their opinion on certain things, and you need to have factors in place that kind of can mitigate how much of an impact that's going to have. There's nothing worse, I think, than going on a job and realizing that you should have charged for something that you haven't done, and then resenting the client because of it. It's not the client's fault, like it's on you. And you need to be realizing that those situations might arise, and if you've got the right things in place, then at least you can be like, well, it doesn't matter that it's going to be another day's editing because I'm going to get paid for it. Do you know what I mean? Like I think that's important.
Yeah. And also, it's important that that those things are clearly outlined, because the client respects you so much more for it, and they see the value. I think a lot of, like, one thing that I'm working with some of my clients on, working with those kind of clients that are that are used to seeing packages, say personal branding clients, or clients that are maybe very small business, and they're just not used to seeing like a commercial estimate where everything is laid out and it's very overwhelming to them. And so photographers are trying to like find ways to streamline it and make it more understandable and approachable for them. But what they end up doing in that process sometimes is excluding a whole bunch of things. So then the client doesn't understand the value that actually is taking place. So, sometimes I'll help photographers build an estimate. So behind the scenes, you've got your estimate with your line items that have values associated with them, with your fee, with your usage, with everything, but then presenting it almost like a package. So they see all the lines, but they don't see the numbers that go with the lines. So they don't see the usage separated. They don't see the stylist separated. They just see, because somehow $6,000 presented that way doesn't seem as much as you're paying this for usage, you're paying this for this item and this item. And they kind of have this expectation that 6,000 isn't that much money, even though if they saw it the other way, they would. So I think it really also comes down to really understanding who your client is and how they're going to receive things, in the best way possible. So you kind of have to tweak how you do things. But I think one of the things, is being consistent behind the scenes. So if your rate is $2,500 a day, it doesn't change necessarily depending who the client is, but how you present it to them might change. But also that the usage doesn't change. You know what I mean? Like the usage does change because that is very dependent on the shoot, on the client, on all of the different factors.
It is. Yeah. Very, very tricky. Now, obviously, as photographers, we are meant to be able to get on with people straight away, be able to really kind of chat to people. But often I might have only had one call with the client ahead of putting in a quote. How do you have any tips on how you might be able to present? You talk about taking that kind of quote to the client and presenting it to them and judging, how you are going to kind of have it all laid out, how you're going to display it for them. How would you, if you've only maybe had like a 10 or 15, half an hour call with the client, you've only met them once, do you then just have to kind of go from how they were on that call?
Well, I think what I'm talking about is like big picture, not so much like the individual client, but understanding who your client base is. So if and I think, one of the other things to touch on is the idea of that knowing who your client is very important with so much of the business side of things is, okay, am I working with small businesses? Or am I working on ad jobs? Are agencies my main contact person, like ad agencies? Is it production houses? Is it marketing agencies? There are so many, it's a very confusing landscape right now. There are a lot of different entities that are taking lead on projects, and they have a different agenda, a different point of view. And so for photographers, I think, they're outside of their comfort zone a lot of the time. But if you can at least understand, okay, 5 years, my goal is to be working on advertising jobs with ad agencies, then that's your client. Those are the people that you want to be working with. So you're not necessarily knowing them individually, which hopefully that's part of your plan anyway, is to build a relationship, because this is an industry built on relationships, but to at least understand who you want to be working with. Because I think I see this happen a lot with social media. Photographers get confused about who they're trying to market to, who they're trying to speak to. And so they're like pumping out all of this stuff, and you look at it from an outsider and you're like, you're not a social media marketer. You're not doing that. So you don't need to share all of this stuff that's totally irrelevant to the people that you're actually speaking to. So, all of those things. But I think the estimate as well, how you present, will be consistent if you understand who you're going to be working with.
That makes perfect sense. I would love to ask you about something you've just said. it's a relationship business, right? So me and a friend, we were sat having a coffee the other day, and we said not far off word for word what you've just said, but the follow up to it was, since COVID, and I don't know, I'm sure it's probably the same in your market, I have really struggled to get face-to-face meetings. And a lot of the people that I had great relationships before have either left the industry, or they've moved in-house somewhere, or they've gone to different companies. And so I feel like I'm kind of building that all back up again, but trying to get the face-to-face meetings. People are working from home a lot here now, 2 or 3 days a week, and then they're only in the office maybe 1 or 2 days. So trying to then get, there's now obviously the same, if not more, photographers trying to vie for that piece of attention from that person, and they're only in the office. I kind of feel for them, because obviously that one day they're in the office, they've got to try and get everyone, all the meetings with the team done, all of this stuff with suppliers done, or all of that stuff, and then try and find time to meet photographers. It feels like it's becoming harder and harder to get those meetings to even kickstart the relationships.
Yeah, I agree. I think that portfolio reviews is a really, that's one of the things that I definitely recommend to a lot of photographers who are trying to get some face-to-face time. I think it's more valuable to go to a portfolio review and meet the people that you want to be working with, than it is to blast an email to thousands of people on your list, because you're getting that one-on-one. And so much of the time you meet with them and you have these expectations that, they're the perfect, and it's sometimes not the people that you expect you're going to click with, or that your work is going to resonate with them. So I do think that face-to-face, a lot of them are happening online right now. So that makes it, although the face-to-face in-person ones are coming back quite a bit. I know a lot of photographers who are going to the ones in New York and California, and so it is, in-person is happening more, and a lot of photographers are going to them. I highly recommend
they quite common
because
over in North America?
Well, there are a few that are like the regular ones that happen. So they happen every year. And then during COVID, they kind of all went online. And I didn't think that was as effective. One of the big things about those is that you're able to get in contact with them. And they made all these rules about not being able to get their email address and not being able to give them some kind of promo. And it's like, well, that just defeats the whole purpose, because the big thing is you want to be able to be in touch with them after. And I mean, I get it. It's to protect their space, but I think that's up to them as reviewers to protect their own space. If they're not interested, they can be honest.
I think also to give the guys who do these portfolio reviews their credit, it's, if they don't want that, they won't do it. They all give up their time. They all kind of do this service to us, really, as an industry. We massively appreciate it, but I think you're right. They will protect themselves. These people. I've done. There's one that happens every year in London. I've done it a couple of times. It's amazing to go and meet. I try and meet different people every time, and it's really cool. But I have that chat with them. I go, "Oh, you must see a lot of people." They're like, "Yeah, we're seeing like 30 people today. We're doing it for 3 days." You kind of go, wow, fair play. But if they didn't want to do it, they wouldn't be doing it. Yeah. So it's, I mean, I'm glad you think they're worthwhile.
I think, I do. I think they're one of the most valuable things that you can do, like, especially at a certain point in your career when you are trying to build those relationships. I think once you have the relationships, it's about nurturing them. But to get them in the first place, that's a really key thing. I think, I know marketing is a little bit of a tangent, but, doing all of those things, everything that you can, whether it's email marketing is the least effective, but it's the most cost effective. It's the most, it's the way that people it's approachable. But I think to question earlier, definitely when we are trying to build those relationships, a lot of it is about them, right? So when you're thinking about how am I going to build a relationship with somebody when they're not even looking at my work? Well, it's really up to you as the photographer. They're not looking for you, which is the thing that a lot of photographers who are especially like at that point maybe have been working with more consumer clients or or going up leveling. They're thinking, they're working on their SEO, they're working on their this, and I'm, half the time I'm saying SEO is really not of value for a certain kind of client because they're not looking for you. You need to be looking for them. So it's similar when you're trying to build those relationships. You need to be building that relationship because they don't even know you exist. So, find out more about them. What awards have they won? Why do you think you have a connection with them? Is there something, do they do a magazine that like you really love something about it? Have they worked on a campaign that you're really interested in? Well, those are all points of entry, but they're based on that person, not on you. And it's about quality, not quantity. It's about like building those targeted connections rather slowly, rather than dumping over like thousands of people that you just don't even know who is who. And it goes a lot further too. People appreciate that, the investment.
Yes, as long as you take it to a certain point and don't take it too far. During COVID, I met with someone online and I'd done my research on them and I'd found out a little bit about them, but I'd also found like a fundraiser from their friends to raise money for a watch for them. And I was like, oh, I hear you like this brand of watches. And they kind of went, right. Okay, cool. Well, listen, it's been really nice to chat to you. And I was like, oh, did I take it too far? Okay, cool. Right, good to know. Okay. Yeah. So you can do too much research, turns out.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is a really good place to do the research because anything they're putting on LinkedIn is from their professional standpoint. It's not Instagram and Facebook and other places like that are more personal spaces for them. So the stuff that they're sharing is more personal. Whereas when they're going to LinkedIn, they're looking for work. Usually they're looking for work. And this is why I always tell people too, LinkedIn isn't really the place that you're going to friend them and follow them and connect with them, because that's what they're using to get jobs for themselves. They're not using it to talk to other photographers. So it's a research tool. It's a way to like find out things, but it's a safe way to do it because anything they're posting there is career based. It's based on awards. It's based on articles they've written. It's based on things that they are okay with the professional world seeing about themselves.
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn's great.
I want to take things just back a step, if I may, because one of the things I wanted to talk about, and I know that a lot of our listeners wanted to talk about, was to go into a bit more detail on usage. And I think there's huge areas of confusion with usage, and I do think that it's changed a lot in the last 20 years. And I do think that partly to blame for that is the kind of creeping I don't know what the word is, but like demand for moving image and the traditional kind of usage that would have been involved in moving image. And now, the fact that we've got shoots that involve both of those things, but one of them demands usage for this and the other one doesn't demand usage. So I guess I want to ask you a couple of questions. One, do you think that usage as we know it is here to stay, or do you think that it will inevitably fall in line with other usage practices and photographers will lose out to some extent? And two, how do you explain to photographers the idea of usage, and how do they explain it to clients in a way that's easy to understand for people who are know nothing about it? I've heard lots of analogies over the years of saying, well, you
Mm-hmm.
can either rent a house or buy a house and all this kind of stuff. Are there any kind of ways that you found that
Mm-hmm.
helpfully kind of explain it in a succinct manner? There was a third question, but I can't
Mm-hmm.
remember what it is. But it will come to me as soon as you start talking. So I'm going to let you work on those first two.
Okay. Okay. Well, and I might need reminders too about what the questions are, because my brain only works so fast. So with video, or with motion, I should say. So I definitely have been noticing this the last little while, especially because a lot of production houses are now dealing with stills. And it seems like usage is still factored in, but it becomes non-exclusive. It becomes like
Mm-hmm.
royalty free. Like they want pretty much like unlimited, non-exclusive in perpetuity is what they're looking for. And that's what a lot of the small mid clients are looking for, because they don't want to have to come chase people. They don't want to have to come find people. So, there's different kinds of photographers. So there's different solutions to this. And one of them, for like some of the ones that work with small business or, smaller scale clients, I think it is about building packages around the clients that they're working with. So if you're working with developers, housing developers, they have a specific need. They need certain things from those images. So you can very easily create a package that fulfills that need, that gives them exactly the usage they need, exactly the production that they need, and you can present it in a clean and easy to understand way for them. Similarly, personal branding clients, there's a similar need. They only need it for social media and website. They don't need it for anything else. So you can keep the price point where it works for that, and then just say, this is all you get usage. You only get usage for these particular needs. Anything else, you can negotiate based on what you need it for. With motion, I do feel like it's getting a little muddy, but I actually, most of the jobs that I've worked on that have involved motion have involved usage as well. And I think that's because, if the photographer is leading the ship, or if the rep or whoever is building the estimate is leading the ship, then that's what they're going to build in automatically. But if you've got a production house who is basically saying, no, this is what we need, it needs to be really open, and I think photographers can push for it, and I personally think that we should, as much as possible, just because it is the thing that defines commercial photography. It is the thing that sets it apart. And when you're dealing with motion, I've had a few photographers who have had things happen like, they build a GIF or an asset, a motion asset for the client. And the client then, or they'll take a still from the motion asset and make it its own asset, which you can only know that those things are going to happen when they happen. And then when they happen, you build it into your contract and say, into your estimate, and say, this is for the usage is for this asset. You cannot extract parts of it and make it into a separate thing, because it has a different meaning. The usage is based on the entity and what that means to that particular client. So that gets into what you were asking about, how do you define usage? It is, the ability to borrow or rent an image for a set period of time for a set purpose. And that will fluctuate depending on who the client is. It is not going to be the same for a little mom and pop shop that doesn't have as many eyeballs on its brand as it does as like a bigger brand that has, millions of followers, or, before there was such a thing as followers, there was like more eyeballs on the ads just in general. So, Coca-Cola or something big like that is going to is going to pay more because it has more value to them. So the value of what the usage is very much tied to who the client is and to what they actually want to do with it. So the motion part, I don't know if I fully answered that.
No,
I don't know if that covers
that's
what
good.
you
I
were
mean,
talking about.
I think a lot of photographers are struggling because they're getting pushback from clients who turn around and say, "Oh, we don't, we don't do that, or we don't know anything about that." And I think because it's changed slightly in terms of being an industry standard, and perhaps now there are kind of younger and younger people coming into the industry that weren't around 10, 20 years ago when it was the industry standard. It's kind of like, well, why would we pay for, and you find yourself having to explain it over and over again. And there are definitely photographers in certain strands of photography that just give up and just say, okay, whatever, you can just have everything for this amount, for this day rate. And again, it comes back to them not wanting to pick that fight because they feel too emotionally involved in it, or feel too kind of vulnerable because they haven't got that detachment of somebody else doing the negotiation on their behalf.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of pushing and bullying going on. There's a lot of, I actually, unfortunately, see a lot of kind of fishing for trying to find photographers who aren't as familiar with usage and with how it works. And the thing is that becomes really problematic is that you've got, if the production is all taken care of, and if there's a production house or somebody handling the shoot, and they are handling all the production and that's all taken care of, and the photographer is basically showing up and shooting and has maybe been involved in the creative process and everything, it makes it in some ways kind of, it's great for a photographer because what they can do is just present their rates and it doesn't look so overwhelming to a client to just see their line item. But I think that what's happening with that is that a lot of people, they're sourcing people who don't understand usage, who don't charge for usage, and who are still very talented photographers. And that's the thing that becomes problematic, is that they're not aware that they're not, it's doing it industry standard. Sometimes they're approaching wedding photographers or people who have no experience with commercial because they're a good photographer and they do a great job. And that isn't to take away from the photographers because they are actually very talented, but it does close that gap of the race to the bottom. Like, it makes it so that, oh, wow, so the price is suddenly a lot lower to do a job that, and yet what ends up happening is they eventually realize it. Like, the photographer will eventually realize, oh, wait a minute, that what's happening here, but then it's too late because a new bar has been set, a new standard has been set. And then, and then the people who have been bumped out of that position, who were previously making a decent living doing that particular niche or area of the industry, are now no longer able to sustain their business because they have to fight against prices that are not sustainable. And the photographers who have taken those over realize it, but it's like they can't, it's hard to catch up. You can't backpedal very easily. You can't change a dynamic with a client when you've set it in motion already. They will never go up. They'll only
well, I mean, that's
down.
A key negotiation kind of tip, isn't it? Really, like, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to negotiate up in price. It's much easier to start at a healthy price and then work from there. What needs to be cut if it needs to meet a client's budget.
I think one of the tricks I learned, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, is saying yes, but. And so for me, like when someone says, are we able to make this budget work? And I say, well, yes, but you will have to cut this element of the job, or you'll need to cut this shoot day, or something like that. And so I'm always a yes guy, but I'm always on the flip side of that. I'm like, yeah, absolutely we can, but that what you need there comes at a consequence. and it's checks and balances, right? Yeah, you
Yeah.
absolutely can, but you can't have all of what you originally wanted for less. You are going to have to meet me halfway, because you can't have that, like you said earlier. They now want to shoot it in half a day. Absolutely, you can. We definitely can shoot that in half a day, but the outcome will be that you have to sacrifice X, Y, and Z from the initial brief.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the key to negotiating that a lot of photographers don't understand. They don't understand that negotiating isn't, I'm going to give you everything you want for the price that you want to pay for it. That's not how negotiation works. It is a balancing act. It's a back and forth. And it is always, okay, you want this. That's great. That means this has to come off, or we need more money. So if you take something off, you take the value off as well. If you're adding something, you're adding value. And so you can balance things and build the estimate that way. And I find that, another thing is people will ask, and this is one of the things that people can get into trouble with, is they'll ask all those questions that we talked about earlier. Well, they'll say, oh, what usage do you want? What this do you want? And they'll build out, well, the client obviously wants unlimited usage in perpetuity for, exclusive. They want this huge production. They want all this, stylists and talent, and they want all these things. But so when you ask the questions, you have to also ask them with a grain of salt and know that, okay, where do I think this client fits in the scheme of their pricing? So what you present to them isn't necessarily going to include all of their asks. Otherwise, what they end up seeing is a $30,000 estimate when they have a $3,000 budget, and they're totally overwhelmed, and they're like, no, thank you, I've got somebody else. When in fact, you can make it work for maybe not $3,000, but maybe $5,000. You could make it work, but it's going to look a lot different than what they're asking for. So you have to kind of, just because they say they want 5 years, just because they say they want all of these things, it does not mean they're going to get it for the price that they've got. So a lot of clients won't tell you what their budget is. Sometimes you can, but usually they'll tell you after you've already submitted, and they'll be like, oh yeah, we actually only have $6,000. So then you're backpedaling. But if you can kind of guess initially when you're asking those questions based on what kind of client they are, what do you think they have for the budget? Do you think they've got about $6,000? So build them out an estimate that's for $6,000. It doesn't mean they're going to get all those things. And you have to say, okay, well, really, they're only going to get 12 images, even though they said they wanted 80. They're going to get 12. And they're going to get, a 2-year usage, or the usage is going to be limited to only social media and website, excluding advertising, excluding out of home, because those are just going to add so much. So if they don't have that budget, then don't put it on there. And then you can always add it later if they say suddenly, oh, we really need out of home. Well, do you need out of home on all the images, or do you just need it on one? Because if you're doing a bus wrap, then you only need it for that one image. You're not going to need, all 30 images don't need to have that out of home usage. So just give them what you think they need, and then you can always build it out and, grow it, but you can't backpedal.
I think
really
one thing
hard.
that people struggle with, in that we get asked about a lot actually from photographers who are kind of relatively new to the industry, is they find it very difficult to even know where to begin with costings in terms of what their fees should be. And we always say to them, listen, you need to do your cost of doing business. You need to sit down and work out what your annual and your monthly outgoings are, and then work out from that how many days, you want to be working a month or a year, and you can kind of start to get a ballpark figure of what you need to be earning minimum to be kind of living the life you want to live. And then you can start to work out what you then want to charge as your fees. You kind of got to have these figures in mind, but for a lot of photographers, I think that's almost kind of too many numbers. But there's also, it's difficult because I don't know if it's the same in North America and Canada, but in the UK there are certain laws on price fixing. So it's actually difficult to discuss costs because, you could be seen to be creating a cartel. So I think what's been really interesting for me in the last couple of years is watching what Wonderful Machine and A Photo Editor have produced in terms of kind of estimates online. I don't know if you're aware of any others or any other resources. I mean, this wasn't something we asked you prior, but maybe if you do think of anything, which something we can link to in the show notes that you think would be a useful article for photographers to read that are really struggling with understanding how to put estimates together.
Yeah. Well, I think that I think what you're saying, it is the same here. You can't fix prices, but you can talk about prices. And that's the thing, a photo editor works because you can show an estimate, you can show your pricing. And I think that's the really big thing in the industry right now that's so key is transparency. The more photographers that are okay about revealing what their pricing is, what their pricing structures are, the better everybody is going to do. If you can be, it takes a lot of bravery. I think a lot of photographers are scared. I have a group that, I try to promote transparency, but even in a small group like that, people are very hesitant to reveal their pricing, partly because they may be embarrassed that it's too low, or they may be not wanting other people to copy their way of doing things or their structure. But I really honestly think we all benefit from that transparency because that's the only way that we can learn. And that there can be some kind of, oh, whoa, I have been totally undercharging. If that's what other people are doing, or that's what things, or I have overlooked usage, or I have overlooked, I've been doing the shoot briefs and the this and the that. That's really what I want when I'm doing my Instagram. I burnt out on it, but it is definitely like people need to be talking about these things openly and having dialogue around, because half the time people don't know. And like I said earlier, a lot of the photographers that are coming in and doing things are totally out of their element. So it's not their fault, but they're not getting the information that they need. And the photographers who do have more experience are not willing to share it all the time with the newer photographers. So I feel like there is this divide, there's this hump in the industry where it's like, once you pass the hump, people stop talking. But then there's a lot of complaining about the other side of the hump, and so it's like, if everybody could just talk about it, we'd be in a better position, because you don't know.
Well, that's exactly why we started this show, not necessarily just to talk about pricing and usage, but me and Greg have been doing this for a long, long time. We thought, actually, we get so many messages being like, oh, can you help me with this? I'd love to take you for a coffee. We don't have time because obviously we're super busy. So we just thought, actually, let's do this. And so I think this is episode 72. So we're doing all right. But it's exactly that. We thought we would try and, impart as much knowledge. There's almost 50 years of knowledge between us.
There's very much an agreement, though, with you of the fact that the transparency is key. Kind of photography is very much a walled garden. It can feel like that. And we've both been in positions where we've made mistakes personally. And I'm sure, I speak for myself, I'm sure I'll be in a position again where I make mistakes. And
I won't.
You learn from them.
Never ends, right?
No, I'm infallible. What you learn about me is that I've done all my mistakes. I've made them all.
So yeah.
Okay, well, some of us have it figured out and others of us don't.
No, and do you know what? I hope I keep making mistakes. Like, honestly, mistakes is how you learn, right? So I want to be making mistakes right up until the day I die. Like, it's the only way you move forward. So you make a mistake, you go, okay, cool. I won't do that next time.
Agree.
Boom.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, like what I was saying about with estimates, you don't know sometimes to put something in there that's going to protect you until something goes wrong. And unfortunately, that's how we have to learn sometimes, is by something going sideways, and then we can correct it. And just not dwelling on it and letting it defeat us and feel like, oh, I screwed that up. Well, I guess I'm not built for this industry. No, everybody makes these mistakes. And I think, it is important to talk about those mistakes because it happens at any level.
100%.
In the
I think we also, just as an industry, just need to be kinder to ourselves and understanding that everyone, even at, really high levels, still makes loads of mistakes all the time. And actually, if we could just stop kicking ourselves each and every time we do it and instead just go, yep, that was a mistake. I won't do that next time. And then just move on from it. I think people will be a lot happier.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to mention that I think, I don't know if it's too political for you, but basically, I have seen in the industry, I did do some repping for a little while. Not my thing. I'm not a rep. I don't enjoy that part of it. I like working with photographers. That's my, my focus. But one of the things that I experienced quite a bit of is, especially like there was a lot of, clients who were wanting to check boxes and wanting to find the female photographer, find the marginalized photographers. And, but there was this undercutting going on. And I really want to I think it's so important that when there is this attempt in the industry to try and correct itself and do the right thing by hiring, photographers who are not always the ones who are the white guy who we can go out for a beer with, that those photographers are also being paid appropriately and not being taken
completely
advantage
no
of.
I completely agree. If you are going to do and try and show representation across your vendor supplier list, then you absolutely should be equal playing field as far as wages and stuff go. It's, for example, there was a fashion.
Otherwise, you're not helping the problem. You're part of the problem.
Exactly. You're definitely. Also, don't try and just jump on any bandwagon. If you're going to do that, no, don't just try and be a part of the trend. Actually, try and make some effective change. If you're going to try and build these people up, actually do it. There was a fashion brand, the name of which completely escapes me, but they created a whole fashion campaign using AI generated models, and they were all ethnically diverse, and they were all from. I say from. They were created using AI, right? No,
So they
exactly.
From
but
they were
they were, and then the brand kind of put out this thing, and they were like, "Hey, look how cool it is that we're promoting, ethnically diverse models or models from a social set that might not have been represented much." And you kind of go, "But you're not.
Yeah,
you're doing the opposite. What you're doing is
you're taking work away
purely
from
taking
people.
advantage of that, and you're not. That nobody there from that group has been paid a penny. How is that beneficial?
Right.
That is ridiculous.
Yeah.
That does kind of bring the bit of the elephant in the room that photographers have really been facing in 2024 and 2023 into full view, and it wasn't something we were initially going to talk about, but it would be remiss of me not to get your opinion and your thoughts on AI in general and their kind of that involvement in the industry and what you think of it basically, or where you see it potentially going, because I think it's impossible.
That was a deep sigh.
It's impossible, isn't it, for people to be soothsayers on this front, but it is a bit scary.
Yeah. It is a bit scary. I think I feel conflicted, and to be completely honest with you, I have not done a deep dive into it because I'm a little bit overwhelmed by the whole thing. So I'm not an expert on AI and how it is going to affect the industry. But what I will say is I'm not young, so I have seen this industry go through many transformations, digital being one of them, stock royalty-free imagery being something, all of those transitions, people have a lot of fear. And I do think, finding a way to embrace and just talk about these transitions and just I think having dialogue around the impact that it is having on the industry, but it doesn't mean the end. It doesn't mean things are going to be worse. It does mean things are going to shift and change. But I think also, there are so many implications with AI that we're not even thinking about right now. And you don't even know, I think there are more reasons why it's going to be stopped as like something that is going to be the default. I think there are so many long-term repercussions that it could have that I can't see it taking the place, just because I think legal wise, there are a lot of problems. And I do know, like, one of the things people were talking about was, how they use it to grab images from photographers' work. Well, that part of it is actually not usage rights violation. It's not, because those once you create an image, like if I create an image and then you go and you take that same image that I've created and you change it so that it has a different meaning, it is not a copyright violation. And I know this because I come from an art background, and a lot of art in the conceptual world was doing just that, was playing with this idea and this concept of the origin of an image, or who owns the like, they didn't talk about rights, but if I take a photograph of a photograph, it looks the same when I'm looking at it, but the meaning changes because I've put a concept onto it. It has to be intentional, and you have to be able to back that up. Like, we can't just all go around taking photographs of somebody else's photograph and calling it our own. It has to be, there has to be an intention behind it. But I think that it does speak to that. They can do that, but there are other legal implications. There are other things that they shouldn't be doing. So
yeah,
100%. Oh,
yeah. But one of the things I did want to mention, just back to the conversation before, is just that I think that what my point was with all of the talk about, using marginalized photographers to build up, is just that there's a lot of things that happen behind closed doors. There's a lot of decisions that are made behind closed doors, and photographers are doing things like making decisions in their business without talking. So it really all comes back to transparency. The more transparency there can be in the industry between photographers, but also between agencies, between, like, talking about it, rather than this feeling right now of people trying to take advantage. And I think that that's the thing that I'm feeling right now in the industry, is that there's this, like, trying to pull wool over people's eyes. And that's not really what this industry should be about. We should all be working together to, like, to help each other succeed. Like, you should want to see another photographer succeed. You should want to see, the agencies should want to see the photographers get paid what their value is. Like, everybody wins if we can all be more transparent and more open about things. Sorry.
A rising tide floats all ships and all that, really, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. Not to be like,
no, that's
too idealistic.
That's a good place for us to, I think, to kind of bring our chat to a bit of a conclusion, because we have had you for an hour now. So one thing I want to say before we go, obviously we do always have our final two questions, which are sort of quick fire, depending, because sometimes actually we can go really in depth on this. But these are what your desert island camera and your desert island photo book would be. Now, obviously, it could be anything. We've had people who've chosen iPhones. We've had people who've had some obscure camera that we've never heard of and had to look up because their granddad gave it to them or something. So, yeah, I'd be interested to hear on both fronts. What would be your photo book that you would take to a desert island, and what would be your camera that you would take to a desert island?
To be honest, I don't really have, and I will say what I like about those things. Like, first of all, because I'm not a photographer anymore. I have in the past, but my first camera, I don't even remember which one it was, but it was a Canon, and it was a manual. I love the darkroom, so anything that can involve that is what I would want to have. I'd want to shoot film. I'd love to do something medium format because I never really got to do that. But
Okay.
yeah. And then, or I am also interested in all this mirrorless camera stuff that people talk about. I have never really experienced it, but
it's cool. We both use mirrorless.
And then,
yeah.
Is it?
Yeah,
Is it? Oh, cool.
But we both also have medium format film cameras. So
yeah, that's true. True.
Yeah.
And Greg's got a roll of film tattooed through his neck. So.
Oh.
Take what Tom said and take what Tom said and reverse it entirely. You'll realize it's Tom that has it.
I was very young. I needed the money, etc. But yeah, no, the mirrorless stuff is super interesting, particularly from a commercial point of view, because the amount of data you are able to get.
How far are we through? You mentioned data.
Hey,
we have data bingo.
We're past the hour mark.
I've even got a little data bell that I can ring when Tom mentions data.
You say data a lot.
I love talking about storage and hard drives.
I love talking about storage. Oh yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I run a tech consultancy, so talking about like storage and hard drives and RAID workflows and
it's literally his bread and butter.
Yeah, gets me going.
Oh wow! Well, at least it gets you going because I don't think it does a lot of
me both.
I don't think there's a single other person I've met who gets hard drives as much as I do. So
okay, so let's get onto the photo book then. Yeah. Photo book.
Oh, photo book. So again. I would probably say something like in the art world, I love a photo book that gives me an experience that has that I can look through it. And I feel like I've had an experience looking through it.
Is there any particularly in your kind of, in your early days of falling in love with photography? Because the reason, this...
Francesca Woodman.
There we go. We've got a name, and we've not had it before.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, is there a particular book of that, or should we? Because we always like to link to something. So, if you don't know anything right now, we can always get it from you later and link to it.
I cannot think of it on. Yeah, I'll have to send you a link.
I'm not familiar with their work, so that's exciting for me because this is another thing. Like we like to be able to introduce our listeners to new people, and that's actually quite hard because. For so many people, myself included, the photo books that really inspired me are the kind of relatively generic photo books that lots of people who are interested in photography would have heard of. So it's good to get some new names.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. For sure.
Perfect.
Cool.
Yeah, well, you guys, thank you so much for existing
bless
your
you.
podcast.
Thank you for existing. Listen, can people find you online anywhere?
Yeah, what's your...
my website is monashee.org.
So that's
So I'm there, and I'm on Instagram. Although I'm taking a little bit of a break because I get burnt out.
Your Instagram is fantastic, by the way. So I just want to say for anyone who so the monashee.org is Monashee spelled Monashee for any of our listeners. But obviously, as you know, if you're watching this on YouTube, the notes will be below. If you're listening to it on a podcast, you can go to the show notes. Your Instagram is definitely worth a look. And that is Monashee Photo Consultant, isn't it? If I got that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I love about it is you have these little things where you're like, hey, photographers, hey, clients, followed by some little snippets, but they're actually really useful snippets of information in slide format in a carousel. It's a lovely way of presenting it. It just works really well. And I occasionally go there and just kind of scroll through and read them and go, I hadn't thought about that like that way. So that's definitely a great little resource, which
Thank you.
For Instagram is not something you often see it actually becoming for people is a resource, but I'd say yours is a resource. You also offer consultancy and obviously you do the odd workshop and stuff. So I'm guessing people can find out about all of that stuff through your website, right?
Yeah, I have an estimating workshop on my website that's just a, take it at your own pace kind of thing. I do offer it one-on-one with people if they want the one-on-one support. But a lot of people just like the course, and I'm going to probably do it live again because I think people like to be able to ask questions and have specific things addressed. And then I do one-on-one consulting as well as portfolio curation for website and book print portfolio, and I also create some art books for people too.
Nice.
So.
Something for everyone.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom, because I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions from our listeners, and I'm sure at some point in the future we may be approaching you to maybe do a part 2, based on whether or not we've had
awesome.
any specific questions, because quite often we will put these shows out to our Patreons and say, listen, we're going to be speaking to this person. Have you got any questions? We get a few things, drips and drabs, and it's always afterwards when it's gone. They've gone,
wouldn't it be great?
I wish I'd could have asked this
every time.
So.
Every time.
But really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, and it was lovely meeting both of you.